BBC News at 6 o'clock. This is Susan Ray. Good evening. Labour has suspended a member of its ruling body, an ally of Jeremy Corbyn, for claiming the Israeli embassy whipped up the anti-Semitism row that's engulfed the party. US officials say President Trump will tell the UK to ban China from the 5G network when he visits Britain next week. Shares have fallen on Wall Street after Washington threatened new tariffs on all Mexican goods. The government has warned that Extinction Rebellion protesters who plan to disrupt Heathrow with drones this summer could face life behind bars. Also tonight, claims that police missed opportunities to prevent the London Bridge attacks, and the UN says Julian Assange has been subjected to psychological torture. A senior Labour official has been suspended following the release of an audio recording which has reopened the row about anti-Semitism in the party. Peter Wilsman, who's a member of the ruling National Executive Committee, is alleged to have said the Israeli embassy was almost certainly behind a series of complaints. His remarks have been condemned by some Labour MPs, and a number of Jewish groups have called for Mr Wilsman to be expelled. Lord Falconer, who was asked by Labour to lead an inquiry into anti-Semitism claims, called this case an acid test of whether or not the party can deal with the issue. Our political correspondent Chris Mason reports.
Peter Wilsman sits around an important table in politics with a seat on Labour's ruling National Executive Committee, or NEC. Politically, he's on the left of the party, the same wing as the leader Jeremy Corbyn. And this isn't the first time he's infuriated some of his colleagues and upset many Jewish people. Last July, a recording emerged of him telling an NEC meeting that what he called Jewish Trump fanatics were behind accusations of anti-Semitism within Labour. This latest recording, obtained by LBC, was made in January. It was a conversation between an American-Israeli author and Mr Wilsman.
One of these things about anti-Semitism is that using that to whip people up. They use anything, any lies. It's all total lies, and they just whip it up. I imagine I'll tell you this off the record. It's almost certain who is behind all this anti-Semitism against Jeremy. Almost certainly it was the Israeli embassy.
The Labour Party said Peter Wilsman had been suspended pending investigation. It added that it took all complaints of anti-Semitism extremely seriously, and it was committed to challenging and campaigning against it in all its forms. But in a letter to Labour's General Secretary, Jenny Formby, the Board of Deputies of British Jews, the Jewish Leadership Council and the Community Security Trust said Mr Wilsman should be expelled immediately. Mike Katz from the Jewish Labour movement agreed.
If Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour leadership have a jot of feeling about the concerns of the Jewish community, Pete Wilsman can't just be suspended and left blown over and he's let back in at some point in time in the future. He needs to be expelled from the NEC, be expelled from the party, for now and for good.
The former Labour Lord Chancellor, Lord Falconer, who was asked by the party in March to lead an inquiry into claims of anti-Semitism, but is yet to accept the role, told the BBC Labour's response to this latest row would be very revealing.
If this is not dealt with incredibly effectively and quickly, and I'm saying 14 days should be the time limit, then is the institution capable of being effectively anti-Semitic, or is the institution so sclerotic in some way that it might itself be institutionally anti-Semitic?
Peter Wilsman has been approached by the BBC for comment but hasn't replied. Those hoping he is kicked out of the party permanently contrast his suspension with the party's very rapid decision to expel the former spin doctor Alistair Campbell. Mr Campbell was punished for voting Liberal Democrat in last week's European Parliament elections. This row about anti-Semitism involving Peter Wilsman, but beyond him too, continues to dog Jeremy Corbyn, and it's not going away.
The US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, has warned America's allies that Washington may refuse to share sensitive information with countries that use the Chinese technology giant Huawei for their 5G networks. The Trump administration is stepping up pressure on states like Britain, which has yet to decide whether to use the company. The US believes the technology could be used by China to spy, a claim denied by Huawei. There are growing signs that President Trump is prepared to use his state visit to the UK next week to press home the point. Our correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher reports from Washington.
This is something that extends beyond a trade war with China. The dispute over 5G could affect security cooperation between the US and the UK. President Trump is expected to raise the issue during his visit next week, warning that he's prepared to limit intelligence sharing if Britain allows Huawei to build part of its 5G network. His Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has already talked about the risk of allies doing business with the Chinese company in a speech in London earlier this month. In Germany today, he did so again.
We can't permit private citizen data from the United States or national security data from the United States to go across networks that we don't have confidence, that we don't view as trusted networks.
5G is the new frontier of digital technology. It was launched in the UK yesterday in 6 cities. It offers much faster data speeds and will become the foundation of many mobile networks. Huawei is at the forefront of this digital revolution, but the Americans insist that's a security threat because the system could be used as a vehicle for Chinese spying. Britain is moving towards letting Huawei build certain parts of its network, non-core elements such as transmission equipment, rather than information infrastructure. But Mr. Trump's national security advisor John Bolton said yesterday the U.S. did not believe it was possible to neatly divide 5G networks into core and non-core components. He said Washington would accept zero risk.
President Trump's threat to open a trade war with Mexico has sent shares on Wall Street sliding. Car makers are among the worst hit. The value of General Motors, which has plants in Mexico, fell 5%. Markets in Europe were already alarmed by Mr. Trump's decision to impose tariffs on the entirety of Mexico's exports to the United States. The 5% levy will be imposed in 10 days' time and will rise by 5% each month until October, unless Mexico does more to halt the flow of illegal migrants across its northern border into the US. The Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, said universal justice was more important than borders, and he insisted his government would not be provoked.
Yo creo que va a haber una rectificación.
I think there will be a correction, if not right away, then at some point, because this measure is not in the interest of Mexicans, and neither is it in the interest of American citizens.
President Trump has defended his decision, saying the tariffs are about stopping the drug trade, as well as halting the flow of illegal migrants. He added that if American car makers didn't want to pay tariffs, they could bring their operations back to the US. Here's our North America editor, John Sopel.
The cudgels of a trade war are being brandished by Donald Trump to deal with a social policy issue. The president, concerned about the seemingly endless flow of Central American migrants trying to get into the US, is now threatening ever-increasing tariffs on all goods from Mexico, the last country through which the migrants pass. But what's the metric by which you measure whether Mexico will be in compliance with US demands? There doesn't seem to be one. It'll be down to presidential whim. And that's brought howls of protest from Mexico and a good deal of disquiet within the White House and the Republican Party. Normally loyal and pliant supporters are saying the president is overreaching himself. Mexico is now America's biggest trading partner, importing medical instruments, high-tech goods, cars, machinery, and a huge amount of fresh agricultural produce like avocados. And that means the introduction of sweeping tariffs will be felt immediately by American consumers at the supermarket checkout. If there's retaliation, that'll hit American exporters already reeling from the trade war with China. The president has strong support for dealing with the problem of illegal immigration on the US-Mexican border. But has he chosen the correct weapon with which to fight it?
Environmental campaigners have been warned they could be jailed for life if they disrupt flights to and from Heathrow. The group Extinction Rebellion says it could use drones to ground flights this summer in protest at plans to build a third runway. Heathrow has described the proposed action as reckless, and the BBC understands managers are seeking talks with members of Extinction Rebellion. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Dominic Casciani.
Over 10 days in April, members of Extinction Rebellion gridlocked parts of central London with sit-down street protests, demanding the government takes action on what they say is a climate emergency. The group now plans to resume its protests by attempting to close down Heathrow on the 18th of June. They say that the aviation industry's carbon emissions amount to a genocidal attack on future generations, and if the planned third runway isn't scrapped, they'll try to shut down the rest of Heathrow for 10 days from the 1st of July. The leaked plan reveals the group is looking for volunteers who would be prepared to fly drones over the runway as planes are taking off and landing, in the full knowledge they could be jailed. The airport already has military-grade anti-drone countermeasures to prevent a repeat of the unprecedented shutdown at Gatwick last December. But Professor David Dunn from the University of Birmingham warned they may not be enough.
Most preparation for a drone incursion has focused on the lone user. What's not clear is what capability you would need if there was a multi-drone, multi-directional and multi-wave incursions into the airspace. How you deal with that is not clear.
The leaked plan may just be a stunt, but it has nevertheless caused alarm. The Aviation Minister Lady Veer says endangering airport operations can lead to a life sentence, and police commanders are working on a security plan. Heathrow says a reckless protest would cause misery and could kill. But the BBC also understands its bosses are trying to meet Extinction Rebellion's members to make them think again.
The High Court has told the police to return millions of documents, as well as computers and phones, seized from 2 journalists in Belfast. Trevor Burney and Barry Caffrey had their homes and offices raided last year while they were working on a documentary about police collusion in the murders of 6 people by loyalists in 1994. The pair claimed their arrests were aimed at discovering sources and intimidating whistleblowers. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Page was in court.
Supporters of Barry McCaffrey and Trevor Burney say their case has become a touchstone for press freedom. The journalists were involved in the making of the film No Stone Unturned, which focused on the killings in the village of Loughin Island. The Ulster Volunteer Force shot dead 6 Catholic men as they were watching a World Cup football match in a pub. In 2016, a report by the police ombudsman found that officers had colluded with the paramilitary group. Mr McCaffrey and Mr Burney were arrested last year. Their homes and offices were searched and they were questioned about the suspected theft of confidential material from the policing watchdog. The Northern Ireland Court of Appeal has ruled the search warrants were legally flawed and that police should return documents and phones to the journalists. The reporters' lawyers say the police investigation should now be dropped. Officers in Belfast asked Durham Constabulary to carry out the inquiry. The Chief Constable of Durham, Mike Barton, has said police followed due process when applying for the warrants.
A lawyer for the families of some of those killed in the London Bridge attack has told an inquest that the police had opportunities galore to uncover the plot. 8 people died 2 years ago when 3 men carried out the attack using a van and then knives. 48 people were seriously injured. A senior police officer denied there had been missed chances. Richard Lister reports from the Old Bailey.
Lawyers for the bereaved families have been expressing their concerns that despite indications that the 3 attackers were radicalised and potentially violent, nothing was done to stop them. Gareth Patterson QC said Khurram Butt had been associating with known extremists, including Anjem Chowdhury, had told people of his desire